Hi there! In today's video, I'm continuing with my Rust shopping cart website project, and today I'm implementing sessions. So in the previous two videos, I have created this shopping cart that I can add some products to. And I can give them a price and a quantity, and I can add them to cart. And right now it just says added to cart, and if I go back to the original page and I refresh it, then here we have the new product. Now currently, if I go to this same URL in a different browser, I will get the exact same thing. So we kind of have sessions, we have persistence, but it is not per user or per session. So it's not a session, it's just persistence. So if we add something from this browser, then it will be added here. But if I refresh this, it's here as well. So how do we fix that? We have to implement sessions. Now, coming from the PHP world, sessions are pretty simple. You just call session start and then you save to the session global variable and then something automatically happens. But in Rust, we don't have sessions right out of the box. This is not really a website making language by default. You can do everything with this. So how can we do it? So right now we have this sessions folder already here, and we have just one file, session.txt. And here we have in JSON format the cart. Now what we have to do is we have to change it so that every person that connects to this website get their own session ID. And then we should save in the sessions folder a file with that session ID. And there we should save that particular session's data. Now, how do we do that? Now, it's pretty simple to just create a random string that will be the session ID. But then how do you make the browser save that and then send it to the website with every request? Well, that is where cookies come in. So in the HTTP request, there will be a cookie header that has some name and some value. And then we can have some other name and some other value. I'm pretty sure this is the format. And the browser sends this header every time when you connect to a website. And then in the HTTP response, we can have a set cookie header. And here we can set a cookie. So we can do something like name3 equals some value. And this way we can set our own cookie, which then the browser will append to the cookie string and then send with every request. So if we send here something like session ID is session ID, and this is going to be some random value, then the browser will save this, and in the next request it will send the same session ID to us. Now again, in PHP you just have the set cookie function that you can just add some session ID and some value. But this is not PHP, this is Rust, so we have to implement this ourselves. So let's do that. Now first of all, we have to read the cookie from the request, the incoming request. So let's do that. In our main.rs, we are here getting the request body, and we are setting the headers that go out, but we are not reading any headers. So let's here read the headers so that we can pass them on to the functions that we have here in the route. Now, in this request, there is either a request.headers or header. I'm not sure which one it is. Let's find out. So we can loop through the headers and then find the header that has the value cookie. So let's do that. So we can do for header in request headers. Now I have to go to the documentation because I don't remember what the format is. Tiny HTTP Rust. And let's go to docs.rs. And we will have here somewhere the request. And here we have a public function headers, which returns an array of headers, which is a simple struct with a field that is a header field and a value that is an ASCII string. So let's say let field equal header.field. Now it is a header field. So what is a header field? It is a struct header field. And we have an asstr method that returns an ASCII string. So we can actually do this. We can say field equals header.field.asstr. So what is an ASCII string? Okay, so this is an ASCII string, but we probably want a string slice. So we have to get this as str. So we have to call again as str. So this should be the string slice of the field, so the field name. And then we can say if field is cookie, then we will get the value of the cookie. Now, like I said before, there can be many cookies in the one cookie header, but we want only the one. So let's just parse only that one cookie from here. So then we can say let value equal header dot value as str. Is it this way? No, actually, I think the value was already an ASCII string. So this is an ASCII string already, so we have to call as str only once. So that is the value. Now, how do we parse the cookie that we want from this? Now, the cookie will be something like this. Something equals something else, and then we have some other cookie and some other cookie value. And then somewhere in here we can have our session ID. Let's call it our session. It doesn't really matter what we call it, it just has to be something quite unique. Well, unique for this website, so it can be whatever. And then we have a session ID. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I would just split this string by our session equals. So I would say let parts equal value dot split our session equal. Now, I'm not sure if I can split with a string slice. Maybe not. So I have to say to string and then split. And split returns some sort of split struct. So I have to say collect to collect it into a vector. And I will tell it that I want to collect it into a vector of strings, or in fact string slices. So now the parts should be a vector with string slices, which should be this as one slice and that as the other slice. And then there should be a semicolon here. So then if we split the second part of the string by a semicolon, and then we get the first element, then we should get our session ID. Now, I wonder if I can use the same variable here. Can I just say let parts equal parts1? Now, here's a problem. We cannot do this. And I want to know this. Please, in the comments, tell me what is the safe way of doing this. Or rather, why does the Rust compiler not complain when I do this? Because when we split the string, we do not know how many parts there are in the resulting vector. So if we say parts1, but we don't actually have this in the header, then the whole server will crash because the index will be out of bounds. So I guess the reason why the compiler doesn't warn about it is because it doesn't know. But shouldn't it say that, hey, you didn't check that the index might be out of bounds, since we don't know? So what we actually should do is we should say this. We should match parts get1. And if this is some part, then we will say part dot to string split by a semicolon. And we collect this again. Collect. And we collect it into a vector of string slices. And here I will call let parts equal, if I can use the same thing. I think I can. And if it is none, so if we do not have the first or the 1th index, so the second element of this split, then we should just continue, in fact. So we'll continue this loop. We'll go to the next header. In fact, we can break. We don't have to continue to the next headers because we already found a cookie header. So now the parts vector should now have this as the first element. So then we can say that the session ID will be parts get 0. Now perhaps I should check this as well. Now actually I think I'm answering myself here, because I think when you use get, the compiler will warn that this returns some or none, but you are not checking which one it is. So this is the answer. Never use this. Never use the square brackets to get the index from a vector. And I have to set this up here. So I will say let session ID equal string new. And I will make it mutable. So in fact, I think I have to do match parts get 0 to some part or non-break. And I should have a semicolon here. So that should work. Now we should get the session ID if we have one. Now, in fact, when I made my demo application, when I just did this off camera, I saved a session ID and I called it my ses ID. So let's actually try and read that. My ses ID. And let's just try to print ln. Let's print the session ID and see if we can get it from the request. And let's see if I made some mistakes. Session ID is a new string. For each of the headers, we get the field. And if the field is cookie, then the value will be that. And then we split. And then we get the first part if we have one, otherwise we break. And then we get the second, this is the second part, and then we get the first part. Okay, so this should work. Let's see what the compiler says. We got a bunch of errors. Generic parameters without surrounding angle brackets. So this has to be inside angle brackets. Now this is, I think, the worst syntax in Rust, but I kind of like it because at first glance it looks so horrible, like what is this? But then when you actually know how to do it, then you feel like a genius. Let's try to run this again. I have to save it first. Okay, we got one error, that's pretty cool. So, to string. Okay, so this is a string slice, but session ID is a string, so we have to say, well, do we have to say? If it's mutable, I can say just this is an empty string. Temporary value dropped while borrowed. Okay, so I cannot do that. ToString split. Borrow later used here. Is this because I use the same variable? So I will call this cookie and I will call this session. And this should be cookie and this should be session. And I get some more errors. We are still temporary value dropped while borrowed. Borrow later used here. Cookie get one. Okay, well, what if I convert it to string here and then I get this into a string and then I say let session equal session.split. Now again I'm using the same, I'm not sure if that matters. Let's see if we can do it this way. Session does not live long enough. Okay, so what should we name this? Value is that. Cookie, I will just call this parts. And this will be the cookie parts. And this will be cookie parts split. Okay, that is not the best naming of variables, but cookie parts does not live long enough. Dropped here while still borrowed. Session 50, it will be dropped here. So because this is a string slice and we want to keep the session ID after that, so I should say to owned perhaps, and then I have to have this to be string new because we cannot reference something that is inside this scope of this if statement. So let's try and run this. Try using a conversion method to string. Okay. Now what is the difference? Sometimes you have to use to owned and sometimes to string. And we are compiling. And let's go to our website and let's refresh. And we have a session ID. Great. Now I'm not quite sure why we got it 3 times, maybe one for this page and then one for the style sheet request. And I don't know what is the third. Maybe it tried to read some fav icon. Okay, but we get the session ID now. But now let's change it back to the R session. And let's run this. And now it shouldn't crash, it just shouldn't show it. Or it should say it's an empty session ID. Okay, now what I actually want to do is I want to have this as an option. So I want to have the value as none at first. And then here it will be sum to string. So then we can later check that if we have a session ID, then we do something. So in fact, let's move this to another struct. So I will create a new struct here, new file, session.rs. And I will call it struct session. And it will have an ID, which will be a string. And then I will implement that and I will create a public function new, which will return a session. And I will paste my code in here. Now I need to get the headers. So I'll call this headers. And I will pass it here. Headers as a reference to headers. Wait a minute, what was it called? It's an array. So it is a reference to an array of headers. So we loop through all the headers and we set the session ID. And then here I will say, if session ID is none, then we will create a new session ID. Now we can do this by saying let ID equal. There is something called thread range. It is a function of something that I forgot already. Some standard rand thread range or just rand. So I will Google this. Rust random string. So here, rand thread RNG sample iter alphanumeric take 7 map char from collect. So this is how you create a random string in Rust. Great. So first we have to import this. Distributions alphanumeric RNG. And this was rand thread range and sample iter, a reference to alphanumeric, and take. How many should we take? Let's take 12 or 24. How many is there to take? Can we take whatever number? And then collect, map, char, something. Char from, and then collect. And I'll just put it here as a string. That should be it. Now, I'm not exactly sure what each of these steps do. I think this creates like some random numbers, and perhaps this takes only numbers that correspond to alphanumeric characters. And this takes 24 of these numbers. And this maps each of the numbers to this function, which creates a character from those numbers. So every character is associated with a number in the ASCII table. So this converts them to a character. And then we collect that into a string. So all those characters will be turned into a string. That is my interpretation of this. And then that will be our session ID. And then we can set session ID is some ID. So that should work. Now we should have a session ID every time, which will either be a random ID or the one that was in the cookie. Now I'll remove this comment from here. And then we should return a new session from this. And I should close this curly brace. And I should return self with an ID, session ID. And that should work. So now we have to call here, let session equal session new with a reference to request.headers. And let's print this. Print ln session. And we will use the debug printing to print this. And let's see what is in there. Now first we have to run it and see all the errors. One error, use of undeclared. So we have to first use the mod session and we have to add use create session and run it. And headers not found in this code. So I will have to use tiny HTTP headers and I have to make this public struct session and run it. And use of undeclared crate for module rand. There was something else I had to do. Maybe it was in here. Sorry, this is not called headers. It's called header. It's an array of header structs. And we have to derive debug in our session if we want to print it out with the debug printing method. I have to say cargo add rand and then I can run it. So now we have just one error. Session ID, expected struct standard string found standard. I need to unwrap it, which should be safe. I mean, we check if it is none and then it is some. So I can say expect checked with is none above. And we are running, but we are getting some warning. ID is never read. That's fine. So let's go here and refresh. And here we got 3 new session IDs, which is fine because we are not setting the session cookie. So of course we will create a new session every time. So that's good, it works. Now we just have to set the cookie. So where should we set the cookie? Now basically we should set it when we create a new session. So one way we could do this, which I don't know if it's a good way, but we have these headers here. We could pass this as a mutable reference to the session. So when we create a new session, we pass it the headers, which will be the headers out, as a mutable reference, so we can change it, so we can add more headers. So let's do it like this for now. And we'll take it here. Headers out. So this will be headers in, and this will be headers out. And this will be an array of string slices. My version of headers is not as sophisticated as this. So this will be a vec of str, and it will be a mutable reference of a vec str. And then here, if we have created a new session, we will add a set cookie header to the headers that will go out to the browser. So then we will say headers out push set cookie, and it will be r session. Is that what I called it? R session. I should probably save this in some variable or constant or something. R session equals, and I will have to add the session ID. Actually, I will just get the ID like this as str. And this I have to say to owned, so that I can concatenate to it. And I have to add a semicolon in there. So that should work. So if I now run this, I get an error from my terrible string concatenation. Expected string slice found struct string string. So now I have to do this weird and wonderful thing here to borrow this whole thing. And let's do it this way. Let cookie header equal string new, and let's make it mutable. And then let's say cookie header push string set cookie r session equals cookie header push string id as str. Cookie header push str semicolon. Headers out push cookie header. Let's do it this way. And let's run it. And it should be as str. It does not live long enough. Sorry. That is interesting. So since we set it here in the function, but we push it out to the mutable reference, we can't do it because it will disappear. That is interesting. How do I solve this issue? Well, first of all, I have this problem that I am passing the session ID to some, and then it is swallowed by that. I cannot use ID anymore. So I have to use session ID unwrap as str, because it will be a string. But then I should like reference it, but I can't do this either. Cookie header does not live long enough. So apparently I can do this, that's fine. But this will not work. Now, one thing I could do, which I will probably be punished for, at least in the comments, is that I can set this to be a vector of strings. So then I can just do this. And I have to change it here as well. So this will be to string, and I will do it that way. And then I have to do this. Which is better, this to string or string from? That looks pretty nice. No, actually it's better the other way. This is easier to write. I don't have to go to two different places. So when I add a header, I have to convert it into a string. And this I have to convert to as str. So let's try and run this. And we get some error. Use of moved value session ID. Moved due to this statement. So I should do this. Session ID string. Can I do this? Can I say that this is ID as string, and I will set this only afterwards. So here I still have the ID, and I can get a string slice of that. And then I can set the session ID to some ID. And then I can use this. And then I can run this. And we are running. That is great. I get a couple of warnings, but these are fine. I will fix them later. So let's try and see if we can set a cookie. Refresh. And we got 3 of the same session ID. If I refresh again, we got the same session ID again. So if we go to inspect and we go to application, we have our R session here, which has been set. So now our sessions work. Now what we have to do is we have to save the session file and read from the session file based on the session ID. So let's do that. So where am I saying session.txt? Here in shoppingcart.rs. So now I need the session here. So I should probably pass in the session and probably a reference to the session. And then I should call this session file name, which I probably should get from a function. So I'll just add a public function session get session file name, which will return a string. And it will return let mute file name equal sessions slash, and I'll say string from. Now again, I'm using a different way to do this than toString. Anyway, then I will say, well, I have to pass in here the session ID, which will be a string. Is it this way? Reference to a string. And then I can say file name dot push str session ID as str. Now perhaps this can be an str then. And then we just return the file name. And then I will convert to as str here. And I will say let session file name equal shopping cart get session file name. And I will say session.id. And I will do the same here. So this will be session file name. And I will get it this way. And the save method has to get also the session, which will be a reference to session. And this should be as str. As str. And I believe that I have to make this a public. Maybe I should make a method to get the string session ID, but whatever. So now load and save need the session. So where am I calling load? Here. So the shopping cart controller also needs the session. And I have to pass it into the load method. Does this still have to be a reference? Not sure. And here as well. Shopping cart page. Session. And I'll pass it in here. Session. And I have dot save somewhere. Shopping cart here. And I will pass in the session. So let's see if this will compile now. It will not. We get a bunch of errors. Not found in the scope. So I have to say use create session. And I have to in the main.rs. I added this already. Okay. And shopping cart page. I have to do the same thing. And shopping cart controller. And here I'm calling render, but I need to pass in session. And I can remove this print line here. And let's run this. Takes 2 arguments. So this has to take the session as well. And we are running. So let's keep an eye on the sessions folder. When I refresh this page, we crashed the server. That means I called unwrap somewhere. And this is the reason why you should not call unwrap ever. Here I am reading. So here I should call unwrap or. And now there's an unwrap or and an unwrap or else. I'm not quite sure what the difference is. Can I pass a closure to this? So unwrap or, and then I could say print ln unable to read session file, and we will pass in the session file name, and we will return none. So hopefully it will set the cart JSON to none if this fails. Expected struct string found closure. Okay, so can I do this? Sorry, I'm calling is empty, not is none. So I can actually probably say return shopping cart new. Because this is the thing, I think that if you call in a closure, if you say return, then it will return from this function, not the closure. At least in the match statement, it's very difficult. No, it is not the case in closure. So what will I return? String new. That is an empty string. Okay, now it works. So if we can't read the file, then we will print this to the terminal and we will return just an empty. And then this will say, okay, it's empty, so let's just create a new empty shopping cart. So it should not crash anymore. But unable to read session file sessions/that. And I should pass in the error. Let's try again. No such file or directory. I'm trying to read it before I try to write it. That's right. So in fact, I don't have to care about this error really. I should either create the file here or just not do anything, because I will create the file in the save method. So I will just say unwrap or string. Just do that. And then I'll refresh it and there's nothing in the cart. So now if I say test 1, 2, add to cart, add it to cart, go back, refresh, we have it here. Okay, so now it works. And now we have a session file here which has our products. And let's add another product. 3, 5, 6. Add it to cart, go back, refresh, and here it is. Now if we go to Firefox and we refresh, here it is empty. So now we can add our own stuff here, add it to cart, refresh, and there it is. Now I want to fix this that it doesn't go back. I have to go back myself. So let's fix that. So now that we implemented these headers here, that are the output headers, then we could now pass the headers also to this shopping cart controller. But I'm realizing that I have already passed it here as a mutable reference to the session. I believe that I cannot pass multiple mutable references. Is that correct? So if I try to pass in here a mutable reference of headers and I edit the controller and I pass in headers out, which will be a vector of strings, then let me try and run it. And this should be, of course, a mutable reference to a vector of strings. Oh, actually it runs. So it's fine. I can have multiple mutable references. So then I can just add here, when we add it to cart, I will say headers dot push location / to string. So now I have to implement one more thing. This is not going to work because we have to change the response code as well. So now I'm starting to pass many things here. I think in the next episode I should change it so that I can pass just one struct here, which should have all these things in there, and then I can modify that. So it might be a bit simpler. But let's implement this as the final thing in today's video. So we will say, wait a minute, HTTP response code. Is that a header? No, that's a different thing. HTTP response code header. I think that's in the beginning, 200. Okay, yeah, it's in the beginning of the response. It's not really a header. So let's pass in a mutable reference to status code, which will be a U32, which is an integer. And then let's say that status code equals 302. And in the main.rs I will set let mute status code equal 200. And then I will pass it in here as a mutable reference to status code. And when I respond, I will say response equals response with status code. And I have to say status code from status code because it has to be a status code struct. But I want to give it only the integer. Not sure if that's a good idea actually, but seems easier. And I have to import status code. Let's see if that works. It does not work. Cannot find value headers because I called them headers out. Expected U32 found mutable reference to something. Mutable reference to a U32. And here I will set that this is U32. Actually, I think it can be a U8 or what can it be? Whatever. It's gonna be a U32 right now. And let's run. Cannot assign twice to immutable variable status code. First assignment to status code. Sorry. What am I doing here? Just this way. And expected due to this parameter type. Expected mutable U32 found integer. Wait, what is the type of integer? I'm an idiot. It's an I, not a U. Wait a minute. I is signed, U is unsigned. U32. U32 is 200. How about U8? U8. Wait a minute. Star status code. Mismatched types. I don't get it. Star here. What does that mean? Literal out of range of U8. Yeah, so it has to be U32 because, or was it, there was U16. Because U8 is to 255. Okay, and we are running. So let's see now if we add something here, we come back and we add it automatically. So now our redirect works already. We can redirect back from that. Now, of course, if we get some errors, then we are not redirecting now. So we could implement some flash errors since we have a session already. Should we do that in this video or the next? It's 1 hour 18 minutes already. I think that will be a topic for another video because I did not implement key value pairs in the sessions yet. So I only have this file that can only save the card. So I should change it so that I can set a session key and a session value. So if you want to see me implement that, then you will have to subscribe to my channel and you will get the next video. So make sure to subscribe to my channel and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.